Why is P. Markup promoting Dime Square writer girlies? But I think what she means to ask is,
grown men used to go to the movie theater and sit and watch a guy tap dance.
What are some of your favorite Substacks?
Oh, good Lord. I mean, it's a giant. Where do I even start?
I'm here with Mark Andreessen, who helped define the web as we know it. He's founded multiple billion-dollar companies. He's a legendary VC and champion of the tech industry. Mark, thank you for coming on my Substack.
Awesome. It's great to be here.
It seems to me that you could kind of care about anything, but you've always cared a great deal about media. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true, and why is that?
Yeah, I mean, so part of it probably is I grew up in a somewhat media-starved environment. So maybe it was a story of media deprivation. But, I grew up in the rural Midwest in the 70s. And there was a great scene in one of the X-Men movies where they travel back in time to the 1970s. And the Beast, who's the character who's a super genius, shows Professor X his surveillance station that he has to monitor global events, and he's got it all rigged up with like TVs and early VCRs, and he brags and he says, "We have all 3 television networks and PBS." And so that was kind of the environment I grew up in. We had all 3 television networks. We did not have PBS. It was pre cable, pre internet, pre everything. I knew about this. This thing called bulletin board systems, BBSs, but long distance calls were $1 a minute in those days, and that was pre-inflation. So that was I don't know, $5 a minute or something, or I don't know, $3 a minute or something now. So it's just like completely out of reach economically. And by the way, even if you could dial into a BBS, it's a 300 baud, 300 bit per second modem. So not really feasible. In those days, the modems were what were called acoustic couplers, and so you would actually have an old style wired telephone handset that you with a big cord, and you hold it up to your ear, and then you would literally put that handset in these 2 plastic cups, and that was your modem. So and then look, there was basically the local newspaper. There were basically the concept even of a national newspaper really didn't exist at that point. Business people maybe read the Wall Street Journal, but even the New York Times was mostly at that point still a local paper. And then there were 3 news magazines that came out weekly, and that was basically it for the entire media environment. It's actually like pretty shocking how different the world we live in today is, and I think we're a little bit like the boiled frog, and that we're still adjusting to like this incredible environment of just completely bountiful media and information and connection, and it just keeps exploding around us. But like it was not. There are many people. Let's say a very large percentage of the American population of voting age grew up in just an extraordinarly different environment, and so I was always just super curious and wanted to understand the world, and so the opportunity to both the opportunity to be an avid consumer of media, but also to help create new channels has been really fun.
It's funny that 300 baud modem probably felt about the same speed as waiting for ChatGPT now to spit out its answer.
That is what it was like. It was like, well, I'll tell you. So when we developed Mosaic in '93, the standard still was the fast modems in 1993 were still 56 kilobit, and so we kind of put images in the browser in web pages, and you literally on a 56 kilobit modem to watch like a JPEG image download, like you were watching it, like a lot of people were watching it download line by line. So we actually built a special feature capability of JPEGs in those days was called interleaving. So there was this method where you could download every 4th line of the image, and then every 3rd line, and then every other line, and then every remaining line. And so it would kind of fill in as a sequence of sweeps. And then you could render it basically in like a fuzzy block format based on every 4th line, and then make it basically come in, basically resolve into full resolution. So that was like a major feature at the time in order to get around the fact that basically you were, sipping bandwidth through a very constrained straw. We'll talk a lot about this, but like I think the consequences of the media environment that we live in today are just like titanic, and just it's like profoundly different than the way things were like a very short time ago.
How important do you think harnessing media is for tech companies in particular, and maybe tech as the little tech industry to defend itself, to prosecute its aims, that kind of thing?
Basically, the tech industry, and I would say both actually big tech, but also startups, what we now call little tech. Basically from inception, and the tech industry in its modern form kind of started in the late 50s, early 60s. Companies like Hewlett Packard and Fairchild, and then Intel, and then ultimately Microsoft and all the others. And so it's basically 60 years old. From basically inception through about 2010, I think that we were almost entirely off the radar of what I would describe as the political system. It just nobody cared, and so the overwhelming narrative through that period was tech startups are basically cute and fun and fuzzy and fun to play with, and create
Right.
jobs, and everybody likes the products, and
Which suits the kind of people who start these things just fine.
yeah, exactly.
Generally.
It was great. There's a marsupial famously in an island off the coast of Australia called the quokka. And the quokka is a little little panda type little marsupial. It's like a cross between a panda and a kangaroo. It's this tiny little friendly thing, and quokkas are kind of famous in ecology for they have no the island. They're on one specific island, and they have no natural predator. And so if you go to this island, the quokkas literally will wild quokkas will just wander up to you and hug you and want to be your best friend. They're completely unprepared for the introduction of a fox, right? And so by the way, they're also famously polyamorous, which is also anyway. So
The parallels abound.
they have a great time as long as no predators are introduced in the island. They have a wonderful life. But the first time somebody drops a fox in that island, it's going to be quokka genocide. So we were quokkas. We were quokkas. Everything was great. Everybody loved us. It was all fantastic. And quite frankly, I think that was basically it was great while it lasted, but it was a misapprehension. I blame us for basically and myself for being surprised by the change. And basically the change started in about 2010. And the change basically was it turns out that what we all build really matters. And specifically, it turns out what we build really matters to the shape of society. And as a consequence of mattering to the shape of society, it matters to the sort of power structure of society. So who's in charge, who gets to make decisions, what the sources of authority are. And then as a consequence of that, it really matters to politics. And it's just whenever you're going to have... And look, there was a long history here that we should have figured out a lot earlier, which is newspapers have always been a very politically loaded topic. Television was always a very politically loaded topic. Basically anything in the past that actually touched this kind of, you might call triangle of basically society, power, and politics, was going to come under fire, was going to end up being an object of controversy, and there would end up being pressures, and that's just good or bad. It's just a consequence of just the way the world works. And so I would say we discovered the very hard way that we were one of those. And I think it's been now we're coming on kind of year 15 of trying to basically kind of reconcile and adapt to what that is. And to your question, at the core of that is media, and is specifically digital media. At the core of that is digital media, because media, information, communication, sharing, both point to point and groups, and at a mass level, these things are just absolutely fundamental to the formation of human society, fundamental therefore to the political system, and to policy on many fronts. And so just observing what's happened in the last 15 years, the social media companies have been at the kind of tip of the spear of getting the most kind of blowback and pressure, and then kind of anybody in digital media has also been getting hit hard, and then now AI now is getting pulled into that vortex because everybody kind of has figured out that AI is going to really matter to how society operates. And so I just think from here on out, we as an industry have to really kind of step up and expect to be under a lot of pressure, expect to be scrutinized, expect to have to tell our story, expect to have to validate ourselves. And by the way, that means we're going to have a theory of ourselves, of what our role in the world is, and why what we do matters, and how, what we see the implications are. And we got caught flat. I got caught flat-footed. A lot of us got caught flat-footed, and I think it's time to go on the front foot.
Do you think that means, as our mutual friend Lulu suggests, that it's incumbent on startup founders to go direct? Basically, the idea that you can kind of indefinitely build in the quiet and not worry about politics or not worry about the broader media ecosystem, that those days are over. And if you're trying to make something that's going to change the world, you actually have a responsibility and a necessity to tell your story yourself.
Yeah, you absolutely have to. She's totally right, and you absolutely have to. And I would say, like, I hate just agreeing with anybody, but if I'm ever going to agree with anybody, it's Lulu. And I will
with you there.
And I will just say also, like, she is very unlike most of her peers and colleagues in her field of communications and public relations, and so the public affairs. And so there's just, like, she's right. Many of her colleagues and peers are still, in my view, they're just behind. They're just behind the times. We could talk about why that is, but they're just behind. I'm also proud. I have a bunch of very sharp partners at my firm also who are really on the leading edge here. So there are people who have really figured this out, but there are a lot of people who still have not figured this out. And yeah, so I think she's right. I think the reason she's right is just make 2 points. One is, look, there's always been a principle of marketing for companies, forever, for anything in the world forever, which is basically you either set your own narrative or it gets set for you. And if you're going to be if you're going to be functioning in a superheated environment where people are going to be coming at you, you have to take response. You have to set your narrative, or you're going to end up really on the back foot and in a lot of trouble. And there's a lot of case studies of that in the last decade, and there will be more. And then the second question is, how do you set your own narrative? And historically, the means of setting your own, for a very long time, the means of setting your own narrative was to work through the press, and that was quite literally because that was the only way to do it. Well, there were actually historically there were two ways to set your own narrative. Basically, they actually had technical terms for this in the comms industry. It's called earned media and unearned media. Earned media was PR, specifically PR through the press. And it was earned because you had to go pitch, the New York Times to write a story about you, right? And so you kind of earned that the hard way. And then there's called unearned media, which is basically paid marketing. And so the other way you could do it is spend $100 million on an advertising campaign. The problem is, like, I think both of those have have to a large extent broken down, at least through traditional channels, which is the press just simply is just the press is just like simply out to get tech. Like they
treat you like that island koala, whatever it is.
They are the fox. Yes, they are the fox. You are the quacka. And by the way, they're very good at being foxes. Like,
yeah.
Right?
I think I've been the quacka in that arrangement.
You have been the quacka. I have been the quacka. Look, the reporter show. It's to say. I've heard this story 1,000 times. Janet. There's a famous journalist, Janet Malcolm, who actually wrote about. She was famous. Wrote about this incredible. I think true crime case. Wrote this book one time, and she the whole beginning of the book is basically her story of how reporters basically get close to sources, and it's basically the fox on Quokka Island, which is basically like I'm tremendously sympathetic to you. I'm going to be your friend. I'm going to fairly represent your story. Like, we're going to go drinking together. Like, it's going to be great. Like, the whole thing, and then the story comes out. And it's just absolutely devastating, like a very large amount of the time. There's a great documentary, I forget the name of it. There's a great documentary on Hulu about the Brat Pack, which was this group of actors in the 80s. This guy, Andrew McCarthy, who was one of the members of the Brat Pack, was a group of sort of famous super hot actors in the 80s that kind of were in all the key movies of the time. These young guys, men and women, Demi Moore and Rob Lowe and all these incredible actors. The term Brat Pack actually was basically a journalist who betrayed them. And so there was this journalist, I think New York Magazine, who took them all out to dinner, and he was like, their buddy and the whole thing, and he wrote this just like he labeled them the Brat Pack, and he just wrote this article making them all just look completely unfairly look like total buffoons. Anyway, so McCarthy actually goes around the country in the modern era, and he goes back to all the members of the Brat Pack, who are now these legendary actors, 40 years later that we've all heard of, and sort of doing the retrospective on what happened. And then he interviews the reporter, and he tracks this guy down in retirement, and this guy's kind of like, I probably shouldn't have done that. I was probably really unfair. I realize now I really ruined a lot of friendships. Like, oh, my bad, right? But it was the biggest story of his life, right? So anyway, point being, look, it's not always like this, but there's a lot of this, and so it's just like that just like works much less well than it used to. And then the problem with unearned media, paid media, and look, a lot of companies still do this, and we're involved in a lot of companies that are in this business. But look, at least through traditional media channels like TV ad campaigns, just the audience on TV. I mean, the audience on TV now is monotonically aging 1 year for every year that passes, right? And so the average viewer of a TV show now is for a lot of shows and channels is like now in the literally people in their 70s as the average age. right? And if your average viewer is 72, right, that means you have a lot of viewers in their late 70s, 80s, and I'm sure they're wonderful people. You know, they're not going to set your narrative for the next 30 years.
One hopes.
Right. Well, yes. Well, we maybe talk about that too. But yes, one hopes. And so it's just traditional media doesn't work. And so yeah, you have to tell your own story, which means you have to step up and do it. The good news is the tools exist to do it, and the methods exist to do it. And there's a whole new breed of professional who can help you do it. And there's new companies that can help you do it. And Substack is obviously a prime example of that. But you know, you really have to do it. And look, a lot of people are just like super uncomfortable with that, and they either don't want to do it, or they can't do it, or they just like find it too stressful or whatever. And I think they're at a real disadvantage. And I think the people who really like lean into this and embrace it and go direct are going to do much better.
And I'm particularly interested in this from the lens of what is AI going to do to media? What is AI going to do to kind of sovereign creators? I've heard you say that, I've heard people, you say that people will often analogize AI to the early web, and that you think that's actually not a good analogy.
Yeah.
If I'm recalling correctly. I'm curious, like what historic analogies do you go to right now? What's in your mind as sort of like the template for thinking about the current AI moment?
Yeah, so look, I would say analogies are dangerous and always wrong. So it's a risky way to think, but it is useful. So the analogy that I would say, I think it's more like the emergence of the microprocessor, sort of the emergence of the computer, and so the way we think about AI primarily at our firm is basically these are computers, these are new kinds of computers, and in technical terms, the way we think about this is traditional computers are what we call deterministic, which is for the same inputs they always generate the same outputs.